The Grand Hall of the Galactic Federation Space Command buzzed with anticipation. Hundreds of beings from across the stars filled the stadium seats, their many eyes fixed on the central platform where history would be made or broken. The gleaming prototype starship, the Nebula Striker, dominated the background, its silver hull catching the light like a newly formed star. Elijah Morris took a deep breath as he wheeled himself onto the stage. The soft whir of his chair seemed thunderous in the sudden quiet that fell over the crowd. His dark hands gripped the wheels tightly, the knuckles turning pale with pressure. 6 years of his life had led to this moment. 6 years of calculations, simulations, and fighting against those who said it couldn't be done. Commander Zexlar stepped forward, his 7-foot frame towering over Elijah. The alien's blue scales shimmered under the lights as he addressed the audience. His mandibles clicked rhythmically, a sound the universal translators couldn't quite filter out. Distinguished guests, we gather today to witness what our human allies call innovation, Zexlar announced, his voice carrying across the hall. His 4 eyes narrowed as he looked down at Elijah. This human claims he can pilot our most advanced vessel, a craft that has defeated even our strongest pilots during testing. A pause followed, deliberately drawn out. A crippled earthling. How ambitious. Laughter rippled through the alien section of the audience. Some of the human representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others glared openly at the commander. Elijah felt heat rise in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. He'd faced mockery before, from the doctors who said he'd never leave the hospital, from the professors who suggested he choose a more suitable field, from colleagues who spoke slowly to him as if his legs affected his mind. The Nebula Striker represents decades of collaborative engineering. Commander Zexlar continued, pacing around Elijah as if he were an exhibit. Its neural response systems require perfect coordination of mind and body. Perfect physical conditioning. He stopped directly behind Elijah's wheelchair. Perfect structural integrity. More laughter. Someone in the back shouted something that the translators refused to process. Dr. Chen, Elijah's research partner, stood up from her seat in the front row, her face flushed with anger. But Elijah caught her eye and gave a small shake of his head. Not now. This was his battle. Perhaps on your primitive world, Doctor, such accommodations might be made. Zexlar continued, his tone dripping with false sympathy. But our ships require peak physical conditioning. The neural load alone would overwhelm a compromised system. Elijah looked past the commander to the ship behind him. Its sleek design reminded him of the paper planes he used to fold as a child, before the accident that took his parents and his ability to walk. What would they think, seeing him now? His mother, the engineer, his father, the pilot. They'd always told him the sky had no limits. The Federation appreciates your enthusiasm, Commander Zexlar said, his voice hardening. But we cannot risk our flagship on what amounts to a publicity stunt. He gestured sharply. Security, please remove this unfortunate individual. 2 guards approached from the sides of the stage, their uniforms bearing the insignia of the Federation's elite forces. One reached for Elijah's chair. The crowd murmured. Human delegates were on their feet now, protesting. Dr. Chen was shouting something about discrimination and treaties, but Elijah remained calm. As the guard's hand came down on his shoulder, he pressed a small device nestled in his palm, a neural transmitter of his own design. The effect was immediate. The Nebula Striker, supposedly secured and powered down, hummed to life behind them. Lights flickered across its control panels. The engine core glowed blue, casting everyone on stage in its ethereal light. The guards froze. Commander Zexlar spun around, mandibles flaring in shock. Elijah looked up at him, a small smile playing on his lips. The ship responded to his thoughts, each system activating precisely as he imagined it. I don't need legs to fly, Elijah said quietly, his voice somehow carrying across the now silent hall. I just need my mind. The ship's auxiliary systems activated, running diagnostics exactly as Elijah commanded. No hands-on controls. no feet on pedals, just pure thought, translated into action. For the first time, Commander Zexlar's confidence seemed to waver, and Elijah Morris, seated in his wheelchair, had never felt more powerful. Despite the ship's response to his neural command, Elijah found himself powerless against physical force. 3 Federation guards grabbed him roughly, one on each arm, and another grasping the back of his flight suit. They lifted him from his wheelchair, which toppled over with a harsh clatter against the polished floor. "Stop this at once," Dr. Chen shouted, rushing toward the stage. Security blocked her path. Pain shot through Elijah's shoulders as the guards roughly hauled him toward the exit. His legs dragged uselessly behind him. A humiliating display in front of hundreds of dignitaries. The prototype ship's systems powered down without his neural connection, lights fading back to dormancy. "This demonstration is over," Commander Zexlar announced, mandibles clicking with satisfaction. "As you can see, even with crude neural technology, the human requires proper security protocols which he clearly circumvented." Elijah gritted his teeth against the pain but refused to cry out. He'd faced worse than this. The months of rehabilitation after the accident, learning to navigate a world not built for him, fighting for every opportunity others took for granted. This was just one more battle. "Let him go." The shout came from the back of the hall. A young human cadet in a Federation uniform stepped forward, breaking rank from the line of training officers along the wall. "This is beyond unfair," the cadet continued. "Dr. Morris has rights under the Earth Federation Treaty." Another cadet joined her, then 2 more. Soon a small group of human officers had formed a barrier between the exit and the guards holding Elijah. Their faces showed determination, but also fear. Defying superior officers could end their careers. "Stand down immediately," Commander Zexlar hissed, his secondary breathing slits flaring in anger. Dr. Chen finally pushed past security, her small frame somehow imposing as she confronted the commander directly. Her voice rang out clearly, trained by years of academic presentations. "The neural interface works perfectly. We've proven it in hundreds of simulations. Dr. Morris can control the Nebula Striker better than any pilot using physical controls. His mind processes spatial information at twice the rate of your best pilots." Commander Zexlar flicked his hand dismissively, scales shifting from blue to a deeper purple, a sign of irritation in his species. "Simulations aren't reality, Doctor. The Federation has standards, physical standards, for the safety of all." "Safety?" Dr. Chen scoffed. "This isn't about safety. This is about—" An ear-piercing alarm cut through her words. Red emergency lights began flashing throughout the hall. The crowd stirred in confusion, some rising from their seats while others looked around for guidance. A lieutenant rushed to Commander Zexlar, her movements hurried. She whispered urgently into his ear canal, too quiet for others to hear. The commander's scales instantly paled to a light blue. Fear, Elijah recognized from his xenobiology studies. "Silence." Commander Zexlar shouted over the alarms. The crowd quieted, tension hanging in the air. "We have a situation. Our outpost near Jupiter has detected an incoming attack. Asteroid swarm, artificial trajectory. Hundreds of objects, all heading toward Earth's defense perimeter." Gasps rippled through the audience. An asteroid swarm wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was a weapon used to overwhelm planetary defenses. "Alert all Earth bases," someone called out. "Evacuate the station." "How soon can our fleet respond?" asked a human admiral. A Federation officer consulted his datapad. "The main fleet is conducting exercises in the Proxima system. They're 3 days out at maximum speed." 3 days. Too late to stop the destruction. The realization hit everyone simultaneously. All eyes in the hall slowly turned to the prototype ship gleaming on stage, then to Elijah, still held between guards. The Nebula Striker was the fastest, most maneuverable ship ever built, designed to intercept exactly this kind of threat. Elijah met Commander Zexlar's 4 eyes directly. The pain in his shoulders seemed distant now, irrelevant. "Still think I can't pilot?" he asked, his voice quiet but clear in the tense silence. Commander Zexelar's mandibles twitched with indecision. Pride and prejudice warred with practical necessity on his alien features. "The ship hasn't completed its full range of tests," he finally said, but his voice had lost its edge of certainty. "We don't have time for tests," Elijah replied calmly. "We need action now. And I'm the only one who can fly that ship at the capacity needed to stop those asteroids." The guards holding Elijah looked to the commander for instructions. The human cadet stood firm, watching the exchange intently. One of the Federation admirals stood. "Commander, if there's even a chance." The fate of millions hung in the balance as Commander Zexelar made his decision. The launch bay hummed with frantic activity as technicians made final adjustments to the Nebula Striker. Elijah sat in the specially modified pilot's chair, electrodes carefully placed against his temples and spine. Dr. Chen supervised the connection process herself, unwilling to trust anyone else with this critical task. "The neural interface isn't rated for combat situations," she warned quietly. "We never tested it under this kind of stress." Elijah nodded. No choice now. Beside him, Lieutenant Tara Wilson strapped herself into the co-pilot's seat. A decorated Federation pilot, she'd volunteered to assist with manual systems if needed. Her expression remained professional, but Elijah caught the doubt in her eyes as she glanced at his motionless legs. 30 seconds to launch," announced the control room. "Defense perimeter reports first asteroids entering outer detection range." Commander Zexelar's voice crackled over the comm. "Dr. Morris, my vessel will follow yours to provide support. Don't mistake this for approval of your methods. This is emergency protocol only." Elijah didn't bother responding. He closed his eyes as Dr. Chen activated the final connection sequence. "Neural link initializing," the ship's computer announced, calibrating to pilot brainwave patterns. The sensation began as a tingling at the base of his skull, then expanded outward. Elijah had experienced this dozens of times in simulation, but never with the full power of the Nebula Striker flowing through the connection. It was overwhelming, like suddenly growing extra limbs, extra senses. "Neural link established," Elijah whispered, his eyes still closed as his consciousness expanded into the ship itself. He felt every system, every thruster, as if they were extensions of his own body. The hull became his skin, the sensors his eyes, the engines his heart. For the first time since his accident, Elijah felt whole again, more than whole. "Launch clearance granted," came the control room's voice, now seeming distant and unimportant compared to the symphony of data flowing through Elijah's mind. He didn't need to touch controls. A mere thought sent the Nebula Striker shooting forward, acceleration pushing Tara back into her seat with a surprised gasp. The ship cleared the station and entered open space, Commander Zexelar's vessel following at a distance. Earth hummed like a blue jewel ahead, already partially obscured by the approaching asteroid swarm. Defense stations fired continuously, their energy beams destroying some rocks, but barely making a dent in the overall pattern. "My God," Tara whispered, staring at the tactical display. "There are thousands of them." She began running calculations on her console. Too many to blast, too fast to track conventionally. Sweat beaded on her forehead as reality sank in. This is impossible to navigate. But Elijah wasn't just seeing the asteroids on displays. Through the neural link, he felt them, their trajectories, their momentum, the subtle gravitational interactions between them. Where others saw chaos, he perceived patterns like a complex dance in 3 dimensions. The neural interface translated this understanding directly into action. The Nebula Striker twisted and turned with impossible precision, moving through gaps that seemed too narrow to fit. "Incoming cluster at 3 o'clock," Tara warned, her hands hovering uselessly over controls that Elijah was managing through thought alone. The ship rolled sideways, missing a bus-sized rock by inches, then accelerated through a momentary opening in the swarm. Behind them, conventional Federation ships struggled to follow, their reaction times too slow for the constantly shifting field of debris. "I can do this," Elijah said, his mind reaching out through the ship's sensors, calculating thousands of trajectories simultaneously. The neural burden was intense, far beyond what they'd tested in simulations, but he welcomed the challenge. Throughout the asteroid field, Federation ships fired continuously, attempting to clear paths. Some were succeeding, but others were taking hits. Emergency beacons flashed across Terra's display as smaller vessels reported damage. The Nebula Striker danced between rocks that destroyed larger ships, its movements fluid and unpredictable. Elijah guided it deeper into the swarm, targeting key asteroids whose destruction would disrupt the overall pattern. A massive explosion lit up space nearby. Terra's eyes widened as she checked her scanners. "That's Commander Zexler's ship," she gasped, pointing to a flashing alert. "Direct hit to their engine section. Life support failing." Her voice dropped. "They're dead if we don't." "I know," Elijah said, already changing course, his mind calculating a rescue trajectory even as part of his awareness continued mapping the asteroid field. "I know." The decision seemed simple on the surface. Turn back to save lives, including the commander who had humiliated him. But navigating back through the closing asteroid pattern would be nearly impossible, potentially sacrificing both ships. For a fleeting second, Elijah remembered Zexler's sneering face, the sting of being dragged from his wheelchair. Then he pushed the thought aside. "Plotting intercept course," he announced, guiding the Nebula Striker into a turn that no human hand could have executed. "Tell them to prepare for emergency docking." The prototype ship spun gracefully through the deadly field, heading back toward the wounded vessel as the neural interface glowed bright blue against Elijah's temples. A thin stream of blood trickled from Elijah's left nostril, running down over his lip before dripping onto his flight suit. The neural interface was pushing far beyond its tested limits, the connection between human mind and machine growing dangerously intense. Warning alerts flashed on Terra's console, but Elijah couldn't spare the attention to acknowledge them. "Your brain activity is redlining," Terra reported, her voice tight with concern. "Neural stress exceeding safety parameters by 200%. The damaged alien ship loomed ahead, its elegant blue hull now torn open in multiple places. Atmosphere vented into space in visible white plumes, sparkling as it crystallized in the vacuum. Emergency lights flashed weakly along its damaged sections. "Emergency power failing on target vessel," Terra continued, reading from her instruments. "Life support at 17% and falling." Through the neural link, Elijah could feel the dying ship as if it were a wounded animal. He sensed the fluctuations in its power core, the structural weaknesses spreading through its frame, the desperate life forms huddled in sealed compartments. "This is suicide," Terra argued, turning to face him. Her hands gripped the edge of her console until her knuckles whitened. "Their ship could explode any second. That power core is destabilizing. If we dock with them, we'll be caught in the blast too." Elijah didn't respond verbally. He couldn't spare the focus for conversation. His consciousness was split, half guiding their vessel through the ever-shifting asteroid field, half calculating the precise rescue approach that would allow them to dock without triggering a catastrophic failure in the damaged ship. The strain was overwhelming, like trying to solve two complex mathematical equations while running a marathon. More blood dripped from his nose. A thin trickle started from his right ear as well. "Dr. Morris." "Elijah." Terra's voice rose in alarm. "Your vital signs are deteriorating. We need to abort this rescue attempt." The Nebula Striker continued its approach, weaving through debris from the damaged ship and incoming asteroids. Through the forward view screen, they could now see figures moving inside the alien vessel's bridge. Commander Zexler stood at the shattered command console, his tall frame hunched, scales dulled to a gray-blue from their usual vibrant color. He watched in disbelief as the human prototype executed maneuvers thought impossible, coming to their rescue against all odds. Neural load distribution at critical levels. The ship's computer announced. Risk of permanent neural damage. High. Tara reached for the emergency override, but stopped when Elijah finally spoke. "No," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, strained with effort. "Almost. There." The ship responded to his thoughts, positioning itself perfectly alongside the damaged vessel, matching its tumbling motion with precision that no conventional pilot could achieve. "Deploying emergency docking tube," Elijah announced, each word requiring conscious effort to form. His vision was beginning to blur, but through the neural link, he could see perfectly, not with eyes, but with the ship's sensors. The flexible tube extended from the Nebula Striker, seeking the emergency airlock on the commander's ship. Connection required perfect timing and positioning as both vessels moved through space, with asteroids passing dangerously close on all sides. "Docking tube secure," the computer confirmed as the magnetic seals engaged with a dull thump that vibrated through the hull. Pressurizing. Tara immediately opened the internal airlock. "Survivors, board immediately. The tube is stable, but we don't have much time." Through external cameras, they watched as the first of Commander Zexler's crew stumbled through the tube, their movements frantic and disorganized. Some were injured, supported by comrades. The commander himself remained on his bridge, directing the evacuation. As the last crew member crossed over, the asteroids seemed to close in from all sides, as if deliberately tightening their pattern around the two vessels. No pilot could navigate this death trap, not with conventional controls. "Commander, now!" Tara shouted into the comm. "We're losing our window." Finally, Zexlar entered the tube, his movements oddly hesitant. As he reached the Nebula Striker's airlock, he paused, looking directly at Elijah. The human sat motionless in his pilot's chair, blood now flowing freely from his nose and ears, eyes unfocused, yet somehow still determined. "You were right," came Zexler's voice over the comm, his translator struggling to convey the complex emotions in his native language. "I was wrong. About everything." The word hung in the air between them. An apology, an acknowledgement, a surrender of prejudice. Elijah smiled weakly as blood continued to drip down his face. The neural connection flickered as his consciousness began to fade. "Let's just get home," he managed to say, before channeling his remaining strength into one final effort. The docking tube retracted, seals disengaged, and the Nebula Striker shot forward just as the commander's abandoned ship finally succumbed to its damage, exploding in a brilliant flash that illuminated the asteroid field like a newborn star. The spring sun cast golden beams across the Federation Academy's newest edition, a gleaming structure of glass and metal that stood proudly alongside the traditional training facilities. 1 year had passed since the asteroid crisis, 1 year since a man in a wheelchair had saved Earth and changed the Federation's understanding of ability. 1 year later, the Federation Academy's Neural Interface Training Center opened its doors. Above the entrance, a simple plaque read, "The Morris Institute. Ability is limited only by perception." Elijah adjusted his formal uniform, still not entirely comfortable with the Admiral's stripes on his shoulders. The neural recovery had been long and painful, 3 months in a specialized medical facility, learning to manage the aftereffects of pushing the interface beyond its limits. There had been times when the doctors feared he might lose his cognitive functions entirely. But just as he had defied expectations before, he had recovered. Now he sat in his upgraded wheelchair, a much more sophisticated model than the one he had been dragged from a year ago. This chair contained a miniaturized version of the neural interface, allowing him mobility that matched or exceeded that of walking beings. "Nervous?" Dr. Chen asked, standing beside him at the entrance. "A little," Elijah admitted. "Never thought I'd be here. Not like this." The crowd gathered in front of the building included Federation officials, media representatives, and, most importantly, the first class of trainees selected for the Neural Interface program. 20 beings from 12 different worlds, each chosen not for physical prowess, but for neural compatibility and cognitive potential. Elijah watched as the first class lined up to enter, humans and aliens, some walking, some floating, some wheeling themselves forward. Their differences were striking. Varying numbers of limbs, sensory organs, modes of movement. Yet they shared a common purpose that transcended physical form. Among them was a young Zexlantian, her scales a brighter blue than her father's, her form slimmer and more delicate. Unlike most of her species, she had been born without functional lower limbs, a condition that would once have relegated her to a life of limited options on her homeworld. Commander Zexlar's daughter, Sia, moved forward on a hovering platform, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Dr. Morris," she greeted him, performing the traditional mandible click of respect. The sound brought back memories of her father's initial contempt, now transformed into something very different. "My father sends his regards. He regrets that diplomatic duties prevented his attendance today." Elijah nodded, remembering the commander's public apology 6 months ago, how he had stood before the Federation Council and demanded change. The old alien had spoken for 3 hours about the prejudice embedded in Federation protocols, about the talents wasted through narrow definitions of ability. His testimony had been crucial in securing funding for the Institute. "He also asked me to inform you," Sia continued, "that he is implementing your interface technology throughout our fleet. The first fully neural-controlled battleship completed trials last week." "I heard," Elijah said with a smile. "Tell him I expect a tour when my teaching duties allow." The gathered crowd quieted as Elijah moved his chair forward to address them. The neural link hummed softly at the base of his skull, now a familiar and comfortable presence. "Welcome to the first day of the Neural Interface Pilot Program," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the morning air. "Each of you has been selected because you possess something rare, not physical strength or conventional ability, but neural plasticity and cognitive adaptability." He looked across the faces before him, hopeful, uncertain, determined. "Some of you come from worlds where your physical differences mark you as less. Some have suffered injuries or conditions that seem to limit your futures. Today we begin a new chapter." Elijah addressed the class, his voice growing stronger. "Not as broken beings seeking holiness, but as pioneers redefining what's possible." With a thought, he activated his chair's advanced neural link. The wheelchair hummed softly, then rose several inches above the floor, hovering steadily. The technology that had once been experimental in the Nebula Striker was now refined, portable, accessible. "In this institute, we will not overcome disabilities. We will render the very concept obsolete. Your minds will connect directly with machines designed to amplify your natural abilities, not replace what others think you lack." The sun caught the gleaming metal of the institute behind him as Elijah raised his hand toward the sky. "The stars await us all," he said, "not just those who fit outdated definitions of ability. Today we rewrite those definitions. Today we begin." As the doors of the Morris Institute opened for the first time, Elijah felt a sense of completion that went beyond personal vindication. The path from humiliation to triumph had been painful but necessary. And as he led the first class into their new future, he knew that somewhere in the vastness of space, thousands of beings like him would soon find their own paths to the stars. Not despite who they were, but because of it.